Actually, I go back to the previous verses and read up to that verse. So we start with 21. While engaged in performing the sacrifice in the field known as Bhrigu Kacha on the northern bank of the Narmada River, the Brahminical priests, descendants of Bhrigu, saw Vamanadev to be like the rising sun nearby. O king, because of Vamanadev's bright effulgence, the priests, along with Bali Maharaj and all the members of the assembly, were robbed of their splendor. Thus they began to ask one another whether the sun god himself, Sanat Kumara, or the fire god had personally come to see the sacrificial ceremony. While the priests of the Bhrigu dynasty and their disciples talked and argued in various ways, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vamanadev, holding in his hand the rod, an umbrella, and a water pot full of water, entered the arena of the Ashvamedha sacrifice. Appearing as a Brahmin boy, wearing a belt of straw, a sacred thread, an upper garment of deerskin, and matted locks of hair, Lord Vamanadev entered the arena of sacrifice. His brilliant effulgence diminished the brilliance of all the priests and their disciples, who thus stood up from their seats and welcomed the Lord by offering obeisances. Bali Maharaj, jubilant at seeing Lord Vamanadev, whose beautiful limbs contributed equally to the beauty of his entire body, offered him a seat with great satisfaction. Thus, offering a proper reception to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is always beautiful to the liberated souls, Bali Maharaj worshipped him by washing his feet. Today's verse. Lord Shiva, the best of the demigods, who carries on his forehead the emblem of the moon, receives on his head with great devotion the Ganges water emanating from the toe of Lord Vishnu. Being aware of religious principle, Bali Maharaj knew this. Consequently, following in the footsteps of Lord Shiva, he also placed on his head the water that had washed the Lord's lotus feet. Purport. Lord Shiva is known as Gangadhara, or one who carries the water of the Ganges on his head. On Lord Shiva's head is an emblem of the half moon. Yet to give supreme respect to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Shiva placed the water of the Ganges above this emblem. This example should be followed by everyone, or at least by every devotee, because Lord Shiva is one of the Mahajans. Similarly, Bali Maharaj also later became a Mahajan. One Mahajan follows another Mahajan, and by following the Parampara system of Mahajan activities, one can become advanced in spiritual consciousness. The water of the Ganges is sanctified because it emanates from the toe of Lord Vishnu. Bali Maharaj washed the lotus feet of Vamanadev, and the water with which he did so became equal to the Ganges. Bali Maharaj, who perfectly knew all religious principles, therefore took that water on his head, following in the footsteps of Lord Shiva. End of purport. Om Agyan Timidandasya Gyana Jana Salakaya Chaksu Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manovistam Aptitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadammayam Dadati Swampadantikam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So they want me to read the remaining verses, which have no purports. Bali Maharaj then said to Lord Vamanadev, O Brahmana, I offer you my hearty welcome and my respectful obeisances. Please let us know what we may do for you. We think of you as the personified austerity of the great Brahmin sages. O Lord, because you have kindly arrived at our home, all my forefathers are satisfied, our family and entire dynasty have been sanctified, and the sacrifice we are performing is now complete because of your presence. O son of the Brahmana, Today the fire of sacrifice is ablaze according to the injunctions of the Shastras, and I have been freed from all the sinful reactions of my life by the water that has washed your lotus feet. O my Lord, by the touch of your small lotus feet, the entire surface of the world has been sanctified. O son of a Brahmana, it appears that you have come here to ask me for something, therefore whatever you want you may take from me. O best of those who are worshipable, you may take from me a cow, gold, a furnished house, palatable food and drink, the daughter of a Brahmana for your wife, prosperous villages, horses, elephants, chariots, whatever you may desire. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 8th canto, 18th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Lord Vamanadeva, the Dwarf Incarnation. So, the Lord has entered into the arena, and the whole sacrifice becomes focused on Him now. He enters in such a way that just by His presence, the whole atmosphere changes. And the effulgence of His body, although there were many great sages, as we were hearing yesterday, the Brahmins of the Brigu dynasty are one of the most elevated and powerful forces of Brahmins in existence. And they were there, and many of them, along with their followers. And they are fully aware of all religious principles, can speak very powerfully, very austere, very magnanimous, and all good qualities. But when the Lord walked in, they weren't even noticed. He simply diminished their presence by His transcendental effulgence. And He was just a little boy. Sometimes we see little children, we don't even notice them because they're kind of like they don't take up so much space, so we walk right by them. They're small. And Vamanadeva was just a little Brahmin boy, really small. But because he was the Supreme Personality of Godhead, His size had nothing to do with His presence. Therefore, the whole atmosphere became illuminated. So, we might say that the sacrificial arena is like the heart of a Vaishnava. And we might use the analogy that what's going on in the heart sometimes is more like what was Bali doing? He was performing austerities, he was performing penances, he was giving in charity to the Brahmanas who were all there to receive his gifts. He was glorious in all sense and powerful. So sometimes in the heart, the most lofty material activities are the focus. And we see in this material world people who have many good qualities, or maybe almost situated nicely in the mode of goodness, think that the success of their life is to increase their prestige and influence by giving in charity, by helping so many different projects in the world, even by worshiping the Lord, but with a desire for their own benefit. This is a kind of what we say worship that is tinged by self-interest. It's more like the mood of the demigods. The demigods are very powerful, and their position and responsibility are greater than we can even imagine. I mean, to manage the universe? Think about it. We can't even manage the temples sometimes, or even manage our own life. But to manage a universe, or to have a section of the universe to manage and be very highly responsible for that type of service, because if something goes wrong, a lot of people are affected. So to have such a qualified position is something that's not so easily attainable. But yet they're not pure devotees. They still have some desire for personal prestige and control. Therefore, Bali had that mood. He had that mood. He was powerful. Because he was born as the grandson, yes, he was the grandson of actually Prahlad Maharaj, and the great-grandson of Hiranyakashipu. His father was, what was his name? Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. I lost it. He appears in the assembly later. But his father was also the son of Prahlad Maharaj, very powerful personality. And so Bali had all good qualities, and he was exhibiting his good qualities by giving in charity. So sometimes in the heart, all these lofty things are seen as the success and goal of life. But still, it's all about me. And that's the problem. But when the Lord appears, everything changes. Then it becomes not about me and the Lord, or the Lord and me, it's just the Lord. And that's what happens. When the Lord enters in our life in such a powerful way, we lose our own self, what we say, needs. It says if you want to fulfill your needs, and we really don't know, at least people in general don't really know what their real need is. They have an understanding that their need is happiness, but they look for it in different ways. And even in the mode of goodness, by performing so many forms of sacrifice and charity and being a nice person, even what we say, sacrificing taking on some difficulties in order to get some power, some prestige, just like politicians will do whatever they can, not even eat properly, travel all over, campaign, kiss babies, do all kinds of stupid, silly things just to get some position and power. Yeah, in America they do that. It's like you hear when the president gets elected, that's why when they get elected, it's in November. When they take office, it's in January, so they have to recover for 2 months after the campaign. They say it's a transitional period from the one president to the other, but that's part of it. The other thing is after you campaign, you're dead. They really go through tremendous austerities to get the position. And on the side, they're also using their power to influence people through money and other different forms of coercion. So this goes on. So that's austerity, but it's an austerity in the wrong mode. It's in the mode of ignorance, like that. So, but people in the mode of goodness, who perform austerities to elevate themselves to a better material position, that still doesn't satisfy the soul. Savai pumsam tabaro dharmo yato bhakti ahoksaje ahoituki apriyata yatma supersediti. What satisfies is devotional service to the Lord that is not motivated by personal interest. Now that's difficult. Of course, we understand that that's the goal, to be free from all personal interest. But that's something we think, that's for the great souls. How can I maintain my life without personal interest? Well, we actually understand that personal interests are amalgamated in the higher interest. When we make Krishna's interest our interest also includes Krishna's service. So when we serve Krishna for Krishna's pleasure, whatever is required, it's included in devotional service. Because he's the complete whole. And the jiva also is part of the complete whole. So from the tattva point of view, from the philosophical point of view, the whole is satisfied, the parts become satisfied automatically and fulfilled. That's from the point of view of philosophy. Just like Prabhupada would use the simple understanding that when you feed the stomach, then the rest of the parts of the body don't have to try to nourish themselves separately. They get the food distributed through the system coming from the stomach. And everything else is benefited like that. So making Krishna's interest is really making your own interest. So although it's hard to understand because we still have the consciousness that Krishna's there and I should serve Krishna, but I also have to fulfill my own needs and desires. But here, and Prabhupada gives the example in this verse, Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva is great. He's the, what is it? He is the, what is it? Nimna Ganga Yata Ganga Devananda Achyutavayam Vaishnavanam Yata Shambhu. Shambhu, he's the greatest of all Vaishnavas. So there's no greater Vaishnava, or one who knows how to serve in the most powerful and exalted way is Lord Shiva. He's considered the best of all Vaishnavas. He's also an aspect of Vishnu Tattva. He's Shiva Tattva, but he is also sometimes seen on the same level as Lord Vishnu, in that he's the second super soul. He sits within the hearts of all living entities. He knows what's going on. There's three entities like that. Shiva, Yamaraj, and Vishnu. These three know the hearts of all living beings in the material realm, because their service is to assist the conditioned soul in various ways. So Shiva is also called the father of all living entities. So he's very powerful. And he has his own sampradaya. And he's glorified in so many ways. In fact, sometimes we see he's so powerful he even fights with Krishna. Of course, he laments afterwards. Because being tinged by not tinged, but by his services to control those who are in the mode of ignorance. He's their guru. It's like sometimes they say the followers of Shiva are what? The ghosts, Pishashas, Rakshashas, and all. Brahma, Hiranyakashipu worshipped Manaharika. But Ravana worshipped Shiva. Who else worshipped Shiva? There's another demon. Many demons worship Shiva, but for material power. So he has to satisfy that. So he gets tinged by the mode of ignorance sometimes. It's like when you play with fire, sometimes there's a chance you might get a little burn because you're around fire all the time. So that's Shiva. So sometimes he makes a mistake. Although he's great. He's really great. But he makes the mistake by sometimes like fighting with Krishna. Like when Banasura was there. Banasura was a devotee of Shiva. And Krishna was cutting off all the 1,000 arms of Banasura. And Banasura took shelter of Shiva for protection. And Shiva went out to fight Krishna. And there was a big fight that's mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Amazing fight. And the fight went on for a long time. And finally Shiva, he had this weapon called it's a heat weapon, where he can create intense amount of heat, and he threw it at Krishna. And Krishna, that was the Shiva Dwara, that's right, it was called Shiva Dwara. And then Krishna threw the Narayan Dwara, which is intense cold. And it nullified all the heat. It says in that purport, somehow or other, you can withstand intense heat, but nobody can withstand intense cold. Everything stops. So, in that fight, ultimately, Shiva became remorseful at the end, and Krishna chastised him later. What do you want to fight with me for? And Shiva realized, that's kind of foolish. So he makes these mistakes sometimes. But he's so great. And here it says that he carries on his forehead a moon. And that's his symbol, that's his emblem. Now, in order to honor the Lord, what does he do? He takes the Ganga water, which is the water that washes the feet of Lord Vishnu, coming down, and he puts it above his emblem. So in this way, Prabhupada goes on to say that this example should be followed by everyone, or at least every devotee, because he is one of the Mahajans. In other words, he's teaching by example how a devotee should approach the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That the Lord gets the highest position in our life, in all aspects of our existence. Not relegated to anything less or even anything equal. He could have put that Ganga water on the same level as his crescent moon, but he put it above, just to show his humility and his devotion to the lotus feet of the Lord. So, a devotee wants to take the Lord's mercy and make that their goal in life. And here, Prabhupada gives a very important instruction. And he says, by following in the footsteps of the Mahajans, this is how you make advancement in spiritual life. Sometimes we wonder, this process of devotional service is very simple, but when you read the books and you hear the lectures and you stay around for a while, you find out it's quite complex, right? Just like if you read Nectar Devotion by Rupa Goswami or Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Jaiva Dharma, the intricacies and the subtleties and the complexities of devotional service are so detailed that you realize it's a lifetime of study just to understand this great science. It's really quite subtle and quite complex. And so to know, at least to some degree, the essence of this practice is the means for success in executing devotional service. So that's why Prabhupada emphasizes that devotees should know how to execute devotional service. There are things to do and things not to do. And learning from the Mahajans, Mahajano Yena Katasampata. I was listening to Prabhupada yesterday, and he was explaining to a bunch of philosophers who are all theologians. This was in Los Angeles. It was a room conversation. Prabhupada was blasting him. He was really they were respectful, nice, but Prabhupada wouldn't let up. He was basically saying, you're all theologians, but you don't know anything. You don't know what theology is. Because they're writing books about what they think God is, and they come up with their own theories. And Prabhupada said, this is not theology, this is theosophy. What is that word? Theosophy. It's not theology. Theology means you know, and you can explain, but theosophy means you're trying to understand through study like that. So he basically told them, you don't know anything. And then, they were still very respectful. You could hear how they were asking Prabhupada some questions. And I was thinking, boy, if I was there, I would probably be shaking. And Prabhupada was straight. He was just saying like it is. He was respectful to them, but he was basically telling them, you don't really know anything. And then he said, but he went on to say, but there is, then he quoted this verse, the one from the Mahabharata, which ends with Mahajano Yena Katasampata. What is the first verse? Pardon anybody? Tarko Pratishta Sutinar Vibindam. And basically it says that unless a philosopher differs from another philosopher, he's not a philosopher. He can't get any notoriation. And you have to do something different in order to get some recognition. You have to come up with something new like that. And there are so many yogis, so many munis. It's like Stita D. Muni is one who is actually a real Muni, but there are so many other forms of Munis who have some understanding. So the science of bhakti is quite complex. But then it ends, Mahajano Yena Gata Sampanta, which sums up the whole thing. And Prabhupada says, therefore you have to hear from the great souls. And by hearing from the great souls and following in the footsteps of the teachings, then the process of bhakti becomes easy and what we say, direct. Like that. So this is the essence. This is what Lord Shiva is trying to teach us. Jai Sri Radha Gokulananda ki Jai. Sitaram Lakshman Hanumanji ki Jai. Sri Gaur Nitai ki Jai. And so, but I would like to just take it into a more detailed understanding of the principles of bhakti. Just like Rupa Goswami explains in the Nectar of Devotion, there are 64 regulative principles. Now, 44 of them are do's, and 20 are don'ts. And they're divided actually into 3 categories. And there's 10 principal activities. These 64 regulative principles, as mentioned by Rupa Goswami, who is the Abhideya Acharya, the one who teaches the science of bhakti, comprises all the activities of pure devotional service. Everything is there in those 64 principles. Now, Prabhupada made some interesting statement. He said, the devotional service is really simple. He said, chant Hare Krishna, don't commit offense, and follow the regulative principles. And he left it at that. But then later, with a little investigation into his statement, we understood when he said follow the regulative principles, he meant 64, not 4. Sometimes we think, we say regulative principles, immediately we just think of the 4 restrictions. But Prabhupada's statement, and he said it a few times, that these 64 are the essence, or the complete process of bhakti yoga, as been explained by Srila Rupa Goswami in Nectar Devotion, and commentaries by many of the acharyas on these 64 principles. Krishna, in the 11th canto, in his teachings to Uddhava, takes these 64 principles and condenses it into 15. You want to know the verse? It's 11th canto, 20th chapter, 11th canto, 19th chapter, verses 20 to 24. 5 slokas. Krishna explains the whole science of bhakti to Uddhava. And the acharyas say what Krishna did is he took the 64 regulative principles and condensed it into these 15 main activities like that. So therefore, just like, for instance, a regulative principle is, now, there's some regulative principles that are dispensable. Just like it says you should never wear red or blue before the deities. Now don't leave if you're wearing red or blue. Why does it say that? That's a regulative principle. It's one of the 64. Don't wear red or blue before the deities. Why? Because the idea is that red and blue are very bright and colorful colors, and they attract people's attention. So not to get people diverted to you, but to keep the attention on the Lord. That principle is given like that. That's the explanation. So that's a subtle thing. Of course, we don't simply follow that. Now it just says like you don't talk loudly before the deities. That's one of the regulative principles. You don't get angry with anybody before the Lord. You don't even discuss anything before the Lord while you're in the temple. These are all subtle things. Paying obeisances, how to pay obeisances, which way to pay obeisances, all these subtle things. Using your right hand for, just like when you receive something. Here's a subtle thing. When someone gives you something, you hold like that. You don't go like this. If you're giving something, you go like this. If you're taking something, you go like this. So if someone's giving you a flower, this is how you receive it. Receiving is like this and giving is like that. These are subtle, but they're very finer elements of bhakti that really, they're like embellishments on the whole aspect of the science of bhakti yoga, like that. How to address another person according to their position, like that. That's also a subtlety, but it's also important, or why would the acharyas mention it? So the whole science of bhakti can get very, very subtle and intricate. Just like, I'll make a criticism, just like taking Charinamrita. Nectar Devotion says you take 3 drops and you sip it submissively, and then you chant a mantra. There's a mantra that goes with chant, and then you put that water on your head. And the mantra says, by placing that water on your head, you will be free from the possibility of dying untimely. That's the translation to the verse. So taking Charinamrita is not just like filling 3 scoops up and saying, oh boy, now I get some prasad, right? It's not like that. The mood is to very submissively and very humbly be grateful for these 3 drops, which are actually the water that has washed the body of the transcendental body of the Lord. How powerful that is. We might think, if I could go up and touch the deity, how much benefit I would get just by touching his lotus feet or any part of his transcendental body. But we get to touch him by tasting that same water that washes his feet. So the consciousness that we take this Charinamrita in is really the element of bhakti, like that. So these are subtle aspects, but they're mentioned in Rupa Goswami's Nectar Devotion. So bhakti can get really, really intricate and very wonderful, because if we start learning all these little things, apparently little things, then the bigger things become better, like that. Just like in dealing with Vaishnavas, there's a whole culture simply on that. The Hari Bhakti Vilas, written by Sanatana Goswami, Lord Chaitanya practically directed the writing of that book. He had told Sanatana Goswami, write a manual and teach people how to behave. That was Lord Chaitanya, and that was the Hari Bhakti Vilas. And there's volumes and volumes and volumes of books on the Hari Bhakti Vilas, and it's mostly all for Grihastas. Mostly. Some of it's for others, and it's so intricate. To follow all of it, we'd go nuts, to use a very simple word. But there's some key things that are understood, that are essential to the practice of bhakti, like that. But if you want to make the process easy, and you think, oh, I have to learn all this stuff, I don't have time. There's one way you can be free from all of this. You want to know the secret? Always remember Krishna. Now, it's not so easy. Well, for some it's easier than others, but in general it's the goal of bhakti. But the 64 regulative principles are explained in such a way as to help us come to that stage of always remembering Krishna. But as we come to the stage of remembering Krishna always, the regulative principles are already included in remembering Krishna always. And even if there's a breach of these regulative principles, if one is remembering Krishna, it's not an offense. Because the goal of the regulative principles is always to remember Krishna. Like that. So therefore we learn the science of bhakti, and we learn the essence of that practice from the great souls. We follow in their footsteps. But the goal is to somehow or other always remember Krishna with love. It's hard to remember Krishna without love, because Krishna is all lovable. So just by remembering Krishna, automatically there's an element of affection that comes by that remembrance. So, when Krishna is all attractive. Therefore, it's easy to remember Krishna if we're always chanting Krishna's name, associating with Krishna's devotees, taking only Krishna prasad. If we take food that is not offered to Krishna, it makes remembrance of Krishna very, very hard, because it pollutes the mind. Krishna says that in Bhagavad Gita, that food prepared by others should be avoided. Those who are not qualified to offer food to the Lord. So, and of course, take time and hear and chant the glories of the Lord. This is the essence of bhakti, like that. Okay, so Lord Shiva is teaching us by his example and by his devotion that although he's so great, still he puts the water of the lotus feet of the Lord above everything else. Any questions? Comments?